Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Afghanistan today, meeting with President Ashraf Ghani and other leaders just hours after President Biden announced plans to withdraw all U.S. troops from that country, nearly 2 decades after American boots first stepped onto Afghan soil.
We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago. That cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021. It's time to end America's longest war.
Biden said troops will start to pull out of the country next month, with plans to be fully out by September 11th. And he argues the U.S. has long since accomplished what George W. Bush first set out to do.
I believed that our presence in Afghanistan should be focused on the reason we went in the first place, to ensure Afghanistan would not be used as a base from which to attack our homeland. We accomplished that objective. We delivered justice to bin Laden a decade ago, and we've stayed in Afghanistan for a decade since.
But Secretary Blinken has signaled to Afghan leaders this doesn't mean the U.S. will forego all responsibility to the country that we've occupied since 2001.
Let me be clear. Even with our troops home, we as an alliance and the United States as a country will continue to invest in and support the Afghan people and their chosen leaders. We'll also remain vigilant against any possibility that the threat of terrorism reemerges in Afghanistan. We'll reorganize our counterterrorism capabilities to stay on top of that. We'll also hold the Taliban accountable to its commitments to keep al-Qaeda or any terrorist organization from using Afghanistan as a base for attacks against us.
Meanwhile, top Republicans in Congress are pushing back against Biden's decision, urging him to reconsider.
I beg you, President Biden, reevaluate this. Don't lock yourself in, because things are going to change quickly in Afghanistan for the worse. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are going to benefit very quickly from this decision.
The administration has decided to abandon U.S. efforts in Afghanistan, which have helped keep radical Islamic terrorism in check. And bizarrely, they've decided to do so by September the 11th. Apparently, we're to help our adversaries ring in the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks by gift-wrapping the country and handing it right back to them.
I'm joined now by Erik Edstrom, a former Army Ranger and Bronze Star winner who served as an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan. He's also the author of Un-American, A Soldier's Reckoning of Our Longest War. Erik, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Adam. Great to speak with you again.
Yeah, same. Let me start off by asking you, how did you find out about President Biden's decision to make this a complete pullout?
I heard about it just during the workday, and one of my friends was messaging me and said, "Hey, have you seen this?" And it's hard to really capture the emotion that you feel when you see that, and so abruptly. And overall, I was filled with positive feelings.
You say overall you were filled with positive feelings. Just so I get this straight, and so viewers know, how much time did you spend in Afghanistan in the course of your military service?
I was there for about a year between 2009 and 2010, just pre-surge in Kandahar province, which at the time was one of the most violent districts and provinces in the area. When
you say that as a whole, your feelings were positive, we'll talk more about your take on what Afghanistan has to teach us about American militarism, the way the society as a whole in this country relates to the military as an institution. But I'm wondering, and I don't mean to emphasize the negative, if there was anything that leavened that positivity. My assumption is, and I know very little about what it means to do the work that you did, but my assumption is that you forged ties and got to know Afghani people in your time there whose lives may be altered for the worse by this decision, which doesn't mean it's the wrong one. Was there some of that? Did you find yourself thinking about people who you had spent time with and wondering how this might impact them?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the groups which is relatively forgotten and marginalized is actually the group of interpreters. So I still have an interpreter who has been in the queue waiting for about 5 years for the State Department to finish the very last gateway to hopefully receive what's called an SIV, or special immigrant visa, to come to the United States. He served us honorably, and I do worry about what will happen to him and his family next.
Your worldview changed an incredible amount between the time that you enlisted, which you did at a very young age, shortly after September 11th, and the time that you were honorably discharged. I'm wondering, given your own experience, the way that your mindset changed, why do you think it took so long for our country as a whole, and obviously there's plenty of dissent, as we indicated, why did it take so long for America as a whole to decide, okay, this war that we've devoted so many resources to on so many levels, it's time to end this thing now?
I think, Adam, it's both an issue that is cultural, and it is also an issue that relates to governance and leadership, specifically in the House of Representatives. Tackling the first issue about culture is that America has a long history of pride in its military. You know, if you look at the 20th century, we have come out oftentimes as sort of the winner at the end of conflicts, and much of the fighting is done on other soil, so we don't actually fully experience the brunt and the hardships and costs of war that other countries endure by having the fighting take place on their doorstep. So we have a very distant view of what it is to be at war, and that's one portion of it. But throughout the time that we've been in Afghanistan, we've been getting drip feed information from reports. There's the Afghanistan papers and many, many more, which has basically outlined how much of a fiasco and circular loop fighting in combat has been, and the lack of progress that has been made. So some of the questions around it involve, was it really a issue of the American public not having enough skin in the game, so to speak? Did they not feel the war personally? Because for many, I mean, it's a very small percentage that is in the military, and of that percentage, an even smaller percent is actually in direct combat in a sort of tooth-to-tail ratio sort of perspective. So very few people really come back with those combat stories, and in objective terms, when you look at past wars, the number of total soldiers killed is far fewer, and you're not feeling it in your wallet because it's all been leveraged in debt against the future prosperity of American citizens. And to think, you know, Vietnam, I think in today's dollars is something like 700 billion or something like that. And now we're looking at 6.4 trillion of amortized costs to service that debt. So there's that aspect as well. And I think that on the cultural side, there's a greater issue of people seeing, but perhaps feeling a sense of civic helplessness, or this sentiment of what I've described as lobotomized patriotism in the United States, where patriotism here differs vastly from other countries. And what it means in America is bigger and better, more ostentatious presentations of flags and sort of pageantry. But at the same time, it always, or at least after combat, seemed befuddling that people would pat these soldiers on the back, say thank you for your service, knowing that the war that they are being sent to, perhaps for their 4th year-long deployment, is self-defeating. And to me, that isn't, in fact, patriotism. That's more like betrayal. And to talk about the second issue, which you mentioned, or that I brought up, is about governance and the leadership issues of Congress basically not doing their job when it comes to the war powers. They are constitutionally given the responsibility to declare war, and yet what we have is an AUMF that needs to be repealed, which is all-encompassing to fight anywhere at any time for any duration without sunset clauses or any way to vote out congressmen who are voting the wrong way. So there's no sort of feedback loop, Adam.
I can't but help thinking that the fact that so many of us have absolutely no personal connection to military service is a huge part of it, too. And forgive me if you already mentioned that, but the only people who I know who have served in Afghanistan or Iraq are people who I've met through work. In terms of my own family, my friends, it just wasn't a thing. And I'm not proud to say that, but it drives home your point about how the risks of serving are restricted to a very small group of people who bear this incredible burden again and again and again, well, a lot of us don't even think about it and maybe give a thumbs up if we see them in uniform. Do you think, as you look back on your time there and on the U.S.'s time there, did we accomplish something concrete in Afghanistan? The president says we did, that we achieved what George W. Bush set out to achieve. How do you read it?
Under any sort of objective metric, it's hard to imagine a time in American history where more has been spent accomplishing less. And if you seriously plumb the depths, I'm looking for answers. Has there ever been a time where we spent more money achieving less? And to make the world less safe, it has not benefited the American soldiers. There's more than sort of 2 9/11s worth of American soldiers who have killed themselves from suicide since the wars have begun, and another sort of 2 9/11s or thereabouts for a number of soldiers killed in combat. So the soldiers are not benefiting. They've spent years away from their family. The American taxpayer is not benefiting because all of this debt, these trillions of dollars of debt, is being leveraged against the future prosperity of American citizens. And the American public certainly isn't benefiting because there's far larger fish to fry, and every dollar spent wasted in wars in the greater Middle East is actually, in fact, a reinvestment in future wars, because we have not dealt with the climate crisis, for instance, and we all have acknowledged in the national security community that this is a large destabilizing force. So by being in the Middle East, you're actually investing in more war in the future.
We only have about 45 seconds left. I'm wondering if there are people who you served with who are reluctant to go as far as you do in saying this war was a wasted venture, because what that does is, in retrospect, invalidate all these sacrifices that they had to make to be there. You've got about a half a minute to tackle that huge question.
Disagree. I think that it is a tragic loss, but it is not entirely wasted. That the notion of being able to make assumptions about how someone else describes worth is incredibly individualistic. But what you can do as a country is learn and ensure that we do not do it again.
Erik Edstrom, thank you for taking time to talk with me. And I know you've been pushing for this outcome, so congratulations on being a part of a push that has led to this incredibly long war finally coming to a close.